They told me I was a burden. Not in a whisper, not behind a closed door, but in the bright kitchen where my grandmother kept her teacups lined like pearls. I was rinsing plates after Sunday lunch when I heard my aunt say it, the word landing like a lid on boiling water. Burden. My name is Rowena Vale. I moved back to our town last year when Nana slipped on the back steps and broke her hip. It wasn't dramatic, it was slow. One day she could reach the top shelf, the next day she folded into sleep like a weary bird. I took the spare room, the one with wallpaper flowers, and I told myself it was temporary. I'd freelance in the evenings, drive Nana to appointments, save money, breathe. But time stretches when it's filled with care. Medication schedules, meal planning, insurance calls. I learned the smell of wound dressings and the way Nana's hand searched the bed for mine at night. We lived in quiet dignity. The house held our routines like ribs hold breath. My mother's siblings came with casseroles and advice. They had a running group chat, family business, where they negotiated holidays and who would bring napkins. They liked to say we were a team. Then utility bills stacked on the counter like a leaning city, and my aunt started clearing her throat a lot. My uncle talked more about realistic options, which meant selling Nana's house, which meant moving her somewhere appropriate, which meant anywhere that wasn't here. I worked. I woke before dawn, edited reports for a logistics company on contract, did Nana's physical therapy with her, then tackled another batch of work after dinner. I didn't dress the part of success anymore. I wore soft shirts and jeans, things you can kneel in. At Sunday lunches, I let my cousins speak over me about promotions and vacations. My food got cold while I fetched more chairs. That day, after the word was said, I kept my hands under the warm dishwater. I watched the suds dissolve. My aunt's voice had that lightness people use when they put heavy things down on others. It's just. Rowena isn't contributing, she added. My ears buzzed. Contributing. I wanted to ask what she meant. The house was clean. Nana's medications were accurate to the milligram. The refrigerator was stocked. I kept a spreadsheet of expenses so transparent it could be a window. But I knew that isn't what she meant. She meant money. She meant that my work, because it happened in quiet hours, didn't look like work. Nana's cane clicked across the tile. She reached for me. Her fingers were paper-thin and stubbornly warm. You are my blessing, she said, eyes on mine, steady. She said it softly, but in the way that soft things can shake a room. I swallowed and nodded. The kitchen felt both too small and too loud. My cousins laughed at something in the dining room, a quick high sound like glass tapping. I turned off the faucet and let the plates air dry. Across the counter lay a stack of invoices I hadn't opened yet, their corners sharp as teeth. That night, I lay awake listening to the clock in the hallway count the seconds like coins. I thought about the word, how it stuck to me like a wet label I couldn't peel off. I didn't know it yet, but the next weeks would teach me how labels lose glue when you start asking who put them there in the first place. In the darkness, Nana's voice floated over. You're not a burden, Robbie, she said. My childhood nickname. You're the one who carries. I stared at the ceiling, and for the first time, I wondered what exactly I had been carrying that wasn't mine. It escalated, the way family storms do, with smiles that don't touch eyes and questions shaped like verdicts. A week later was my cousin's engagement party, an indoor thing with fairy lights and a grazing table that looked like a magazine ad. I set Nana up in a corner armchair with a cushion behind her back. She hates being fussed over, but she likes watching people. Her mouth set in that small proud line I know. She wore her pearl earrings. She had asked me to pin her hair up, and my hands had trembled at the intimacy of that soft silver. I was pouring her tea when my other cousin, Brielle, slid up beside me with her phone face down in her palm. So, she said, stretching the vowel, are you ever going back to a real job? The music pulsed like a heartbeat. I told her contract work is real. She smirked. It's just, my mom says you're living for free. I didn't answer. She flipped her phone over and scrolled, then turned it toward me without warning. The group chat. A bright screen full of tiny balloons and sarcasm. Lines I recognized from last Sunday, rewritten in bolder ink. We can't keep carrying her. Nana's bills are through the roof. She says she's freelancing, but I don't see anything. One of my uncles had added a winking face. There it was, the burden word, threaded through like stitches in a wound that won't close. I set the tea down, careful not to spill. Across the room, my aunt laughed with her friends, hands sweeping the air. She shook her head as if to say, what can you do? The music faded, and someone tapped a spoon against a glass. My cousin's fiancé announced that their honeymoon would be in Amalfi. Everyone clapped. In a quiet pocket of sound, I heard my uncle say, if we sell the house, it covers the debt and then some. I moved toward the hallway where the coats hung. My chest felt tight, like a door held by a chair. In the empty bathroom, I ran cold water and watched it swirl down the drain. I wanted to rage, to throw a glass, to shout. But rage is loud and often useless. I pressed my palms to the edge of the sink and breathed slow until the mirror stopped blurring. When I stepped back into the party, the light seemed harsher. I was suddenly aware of my shoes, the scuff on the toe, the invisible ledger I'd been trying to balance for months. Driving home, Nana dozed in the passenger seat, a soft sigh to each pothole. Street lamps passed like beads on a string. Robbie, she said, eyes still closed, you're quiet. I told her I was counting receipts in my head. She smiled, not fooled. You're counting the wrong things, she murmured. At home, after she settled, I opened the invoices. Medical supplies. Physical therapy co-pays. A late notice from the utility company I hadn't seen before. Then an unfamiliar envelope, not hospital branded, heavy like a promise you don't want. I slid a fingernail under the flap and pulled out a letter. It was from a debt consolidation firm. The amount made me lean back. It wasn't ours. It was in Nana's name, attached to the house as collateral. A line item called Family Emergency Loan, signed 3 years ago when Nana was still steady on her feet. There was a note at the bottom, current arrears, 3 months. Intent to begin foreclosure process if unresolved. My skin went cold. I checked the date. The letter was a week old. My mother's siblings had said the word debt like it was distant weather. They hadn't said it lived under our roof, with our photos, our coffee mugs, our worn rugs. They hadn't said it had teeth and a due date. In the hallway, the clock ticked. Nana slept, her breath even. I stood in the soft yellow light and felt a new shape enter the room. Not panic, not yet. Something harder. It put its hand on my shoulder and turned me toward the next right thing. I put the letter back in its envelope and placed it on the table under the lamp. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I start asking questions they can't answer with a smirk. The next morning, I called the number on the letter. The woman on the line sounded tired but kind. She confirmed the balance. She confirmed the collateral. When I asked who signed for the loan, there was a pause, and then she read the name. My uncle, acting as power of attorney, from when Nana had her knee surgery. My stomach dropped. Power of attorney can carry a family like a bridge. It can also be a shortcut across someone else's land. I hung up and sat very still. Then I called an attorney that a friend from high school recommended, a woman named Kiana who spoke like she had handholds carved into every slope. I sent the documents. She called back within the hour. The loan was legal. The terms were ugly but not illegal. Nana hadn't been incapacitated then, just recovering. It wasn't necessarily wrong, Kiana said gently, but if the funds didn't directly benefit your grandmother, it's ethically sour. We can contest under undue influence, but it'll be long and loud. You said your Nana's health is fragile. Court might not be what you want. I thanked her and stared at the grocery list Nana had written, small loops of cursive and 3 reminders for milk. I thought of the casseroles, the fairy lights, the winks. Long and loud could break the person I was trying to protect. I drove to the credit union 2 blocks from the pharmacy where the tellers still called older customers by their first names. A manager named Louise sat with me. He explained tap by tap how foreclosure timelines worked. He gave me a payoff figure, lower than the terrifying total due to negotiated interest if paid in full within 30 days. Can you manage this? He asked, eyes kind but direct. I added numbers in my head. Contract work paid enough to keep air in our lungs and the lights on. But I had no appetite for miracles. I had savings meant for a future I hadn't defined. A used car I could sell for a decent price. A small emergency fund that felt like a blanket I didn't want to give up. I could pick up an additional client. I could bake, sell quietly to the nurses' lounge at the hospital, the way I had before. I could sleep less. Many women do, and we still get up. Louise printed the payoff letter, ink still warm. He looked at me as if to say, I've watched people build bridges out of paper before. It can be done. I folded the letter and slid it into a folder labeled Nana, House. Back home, I found Nana in the sunroom with a puzzle spread on the table, blue sky pieces waiting for edges. We're missing a corner, she said, not looking up. I told her I was going to fix something. She nodded like she already knew. Take my box, she said. Her box sat in the top of her closet, cedar-lined, smelling faintly of old soap. Inside was a stack of letters, a cameo brooch, the birth certificate of a man I never met, and a savings passbook from a credit union that no longer existed. The passbook was tiny, dates stamped in purple, deposits $10 at a time. The last line was simple, $2,400. A note in Nana's hand, for Robbie's future. My throat tightened. It wouldn't save the house, but it felt like a hand on my back, steadying me. I found her power of attorney document under the letters. Still valid. We needed to change that. With Kiana's guidance, Nana signed a limited revocation for property decisions, trembling but deliberate. We notarized it at the UPS store where the employee offered her water and called her Cajon. Nana smiled and told him stories about working the school lunch line in 1969. At night, I turned our kitchen into a workstation. Flour dusted the counter. I baked cinnamon rolls until the house smelled like winter holidays. I posted a quiet note in a local Facebook group. Orders came in small handfuls, then in dozens. A nurse handed me cash at midnight, eyes tired, gratitude soft around the edges. I wrote every number down. I removed my car from the equation, a for sale sign printed and taped, test drive scheduled, a goodbye rehearsed. The spreadsheet was a landscape, and I walked it every hour. 3 weeks later, there was a stack of cashier's checks on my table, lined like bricks. I looked at them and felt nothing like victory. I felt like a person who had been told she was a burden, and who had decided to carry the heaviest thing because no one else would. The phone rang. It was Luis. If you're ready, he said, we can arrange confirmation at your family meeting. Family meeting. My uncle had scheduled it for Saturday. The agenda subject line was, house and next steps. I stared at the word next. I thought of Nana's puzzle with its missing corner. I thought of all the edges I had gathered. Yes, I told him. I'll be ready. My voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't scared, but because something in me had finally stopped asking for permission to be brave. Saturday came dressed as a sunny day that didn't belong to us. I helped Nana into a pale blue cardigan and slipped the revocation document into my tote. The house felt like a person whose hand I was still holding. Photos on the wall. A measuring chart in the pantry from when I was 8 and determined to be taller than my brother. We drove to my aunt's, to the living room where decisions were often disguised as invitations. They had already arranged chairs in a circle. My uncle sat forward like a coach. My aunt had her papers stacked by precision. The cousins were half interested, half on their phones. Someone had placed a tray of store-bought cookies within reach of everyone except Nana. I moved the tray. "Thank you all for coming," my uncle began, the words heavy with self-importance. "We need to be practical. The house carries a debt we can't maintain. We'll list it. We'll get Nana into a facility where she has professional care. This is, frankly, overdue." I kept my eyes on Nana's hands, folded in her lap. I could see the small scar on her thumb from a can opener in 1987. My aunt flipped a page for effect. "We've done the math," she said. "Once we sell, we can square everything. Everyone can breathe." I lifted my toad and stood. Everything in me went very calm. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a living room with curtains drafted in summer air. But the truth needed an audience, and all the actors were here. "I appreciate that you've done the numbers," I said, voice steady. "But there are two things we need to handle first." I set a folder on the coffee table. 1. Nana has revoked the portion of the power of attorney that allows property decisions on her behalf. I handed my uncle a copy. He blinked at the notary stamp like it had been written in a language he didn't plan to learn. "Is this a joke?" he said, laugh too sharp. "It's valid," I said. "Kiana James is our attorney now. She's available if you'd like to speak with her." My aunt's mouth pinched, calculating. My cousins glanced up, scenting plot. "Second," I said, and gestured to the phone on the table where I had Luis on speaker. "We're going to discuss the current debt secured to Nana's house." "Luis?" His voice filled the room, professional and warm. He confirmed the loan. The arrears. The timeline. My uncle shifted in his chair. "However," Luis continued, "as of this morning, the balance due has been paid in full." The room inhaled. He kept going, unbothered by our silence. "I can confirm receipt of funds and immediate release of lien. A satisfaction of mortgage will be recorded. The house is no longer encumbered by this debt." My aunt's pen froze above her paper. "By whom?" she asked, the word squeezed. "Was it paid?" I reached into my bag and placed the cashier's checks receipts on the table, each stamped with a bank's indifferent finality. "By me," I said. Because Nana's home is not a bargaining chip. Because care is not a stage for performance. Because, despite what you've said in your chat, I do contribute. My cousin Brielle looked away. My uncle's face reddened. "This is irresponsible," he snapped. "You can't just." "I can," I said, soft. And I did. Silence stretched, full of all the things they weren't saying. That I had embarrassed them. That my quiet work had been louder than their speeches. That their plan had been easier than their mother's comfort. Nana reached for my hand. She squeezed. A small smile, almost private. I handed her the new document we'd signed that morning at the credit union, a transfer on death deed, adding me as beneficiary to prevent probate chaos, to keep the house safe when the time came. She traced the letters with a fingertip. She nodded. "Good." My aunt tried to regain the stage. "This doesn't change our concerns," she said, voice fragile under its hard topcoat. "Professional care, Rowena. You can't do everything. I met her gaze. I know. I have a home health nurse lined up twice a week, starting Monday. Paid. I let that settle. We're fine. No applause. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the tiny crash of a cookie crumbling on ceramic. I gathered the documents into my tote. The phone buzzed. Louise had texted, lien release recorded. You're all set. I looked up and found all their eyes on me. We're not selling the house, I said. And we're not selling Nana's dignity. My voice was calm, but something inside me exhaled for the first time in months. My uncle stood as if to loom. I remained seated. He wavered, then sat down again, smaller. The moment passed through the room like a weather front. I could feel everything rearrange. I helped Nana to her feet. Are we done? She asked lightly, and the smallest laughter lined her words. I nodded. We moved toward the door, the sunlight beyond it more honest than anything inside. My aunt called my name, a brittle sound. I paused, turned. You made a spectacle, she said. I smiled, gentle. No, I said. I made a point. And we left before anyone could shape a new story out of the old one. The next morning the house felt different, like it had shifted its weight and settled into itself. I opened the windows. Summer slid in, sweet and a little wild. Nana sat at the kitchen table with her tea in her puzzle corner, the missing piece found under a chair leg. We pressed it into place and looked at the blue sky finally whole. She grinned at me, mischief in her eyes. You made them eat their own words, she said. That must taste strange. I laughed, but it was a gentle sound. I wasn't celebrating. I was breathing. The weight I had carried wasn't just numbers. It was the grit of being seen as less because my work was quiet. It was the frustration of fixing a mess I didn't make while being called the mess myself. Paying off the debt wasn't revenge in the shape people expect. It was a boundary written in ink even those who refused to read could understand. Word traveled. Some relatives texted apologies wrapped in explanations. My uncle sent a curt email with links to elder care resources, as if to reclaim the narrative. My aunt dropped off a pie, then drove away before I could thank her. Brielle sent a simple, I'm sorry. I believed her a little. I let them all hover at the edge of our days like birds deciding whether to land. I met with Kiana again. We set up a trust so that when Nana was ready to let go of this house, it would pass cleanly, without committee, without the noise of ownership disguised as love. We hired the home health nurse, Amara, who hummed hymns while she worked and treated Nana's ankles like porcelain. I picked up a new contract from a regional nonprofit. It paid on time. For the first time in months, I didn't stay up measuring dread against numbers. At night, I sat on the back steps and listened to crickets. The word burden came back sometimes, like an echo from a canyon I had already crossed. It no longer stuck. It didn't even seem to belong to me. Maybe it never had. It belonged to the mouths that said it, to the fear that made them say it, to the convenience of pushing weight backward while reaching forward for what was easy. Nana's strength returned in small miracles. One morning she dressed herself entirely, moving slow, pleased by each successful button. Another morning she beat me at checkers with a crow of triumph that made me tear up. We hosted a tiny dinner in our kitchen, just the two of us, and we ate pastina with butter and parsley. She told me stories in her high school cafeteria voice, practicing kindness as policy, rationing patience like sugar in wartime. You know, she said, dipping her bread, people think the loudest person is the strongest. But it's the quiet ones who carry the ends of the table so the dishes don't slide off. I thought of that living room, the papers, the speakerphone. I thought of the moment the balance turned. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt precise. Like I had folded a complicated sheet and put it away with clean lines. In the months that followed, I started a small program through the nonprofit, a fund for family caregivers who need bridge money for rent or utilities. It wasn't large. It was steady. I called it the puzzle corner. The first note we received came from a woman who wrote, "I thought I was a burden. Your help made me feel like a person." I pressed the paper to my chest and let myself cry, not the frantic kind but the kind that feels like rain washing dust. The family still has gatherings. We go sometimes, late, leave early. They are careful with their words now. Maybe they learned. Maybe they didn't. Learning isn't required for me to live. One evening, after a clinic appointment, Nana fell asleep in the living room. Sunset poured into the house in stripes. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. I thought of all the versions of me that had stood up for us. The one with flour on her hands. The one with receipts under her elbow. The one who said, "Come, we're not selling the house." They were all me, stitched together by a simple belief: care is not a debt. Love is not an invoice. If you've ever been handed a label you didn't ask for, if you've been told you are too heavy for someone else's hands, listen to me. You are not a burden. You might be the beam. You might be the person who lifts the corner no one else sees and keeps the whole table steady. That's not weakness. That's architecture. When Nana woke, she smiled at me like she always has. The clock in the hallway ticked, but it no longer counted costs. It just kept time. I switched on the porch light. Night gathered itself outside. Inside, our home stayed warm. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.